Hello, everyone. This is Adrian Alexander, Caribbean Regional Coordinator for Free the Slaves and co-chair of the Membership Committee of the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. And welcome to another episode of Caribbean Connections. I'm here with my amazing co-host, Dr. Cherisse Francis. Cherisse, how are you doing?
Hi, Adrian. Always a pleasure to be with you and Caribbean Connections. I am doing wonderfully today, and I'm so excited to have this conversation. Two wonderful guests who I know quite well, so this is going to be a good day.
Awesome. And tell us a bit more about our guests. Who are they?
So, actually, I would prefer for them to introduce themselves because then they can give you a flavor of who they are and why they're here. So, Marta, if I could ask you to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Cherisse, and thank you, Adrian, for hosting us on this episode. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation today and so happy and excited to be here. My name is Marta Furlan, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for Research at Free the Slaves, and I had the pleasure and the privilege of being one of the co-authors of this report that we are going to discuss today.
So my mistake, I should say Dr. Marta Furlan. We love to give people their titles. So that was my correction, everyone, Dr. Furlan. And now I will turn over to Sneh. Sneh, how are you and why are you here?
Thanks, Cherisse, and thank you, Adrian. It's really a pleasure to be here. I am Sneh Aurora, Director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, or CHRI. CHRI works across the globe on human rights issues, particularly relating to access to justice and tackling human trafficking, forced labor, and other forms of exploitation. We are here today to talk about our joint report, From Climate Crisis to Human Exploitation. It has a very long title, Examining Multi-Dimensional Vulnerability in Small Island Developing States, which we'll unpack during this conversation. And in this report, we focused on Antigua and Barbuda. And in this joint project between CHRI and Free the Slaves, we've looked at how climate change is not just an environmental issue, but it's also a human rights issue.
Thank you so much, Sneh and Marta, for that overview. Let's get into it. I mean, what actually prompted this report? Is there an overarching project? And can you give us a little background about that?
This is part of a wider project that we have. As I mentioned, Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative focuses on issues relating to forced labor, human exploitation, and we've also brought together a number of organizations working at local and national level. We've got a network called the 8.7 Network, named after the Sustainable Development Goal Target 8.7, which focuses on forced labor. And these are organizations that come together to address these kinds of issues. So we've been working on these issues for a while. We also know that climate change is a big thing right now. It's a very critical issue that is faced by almost everyone globally. So this report really sits at the intersection of these two issues that are often discussed separately, climate change and human exploitation. And what we show through this report is that these issues are deeply connected. There is increasing global evidence that climate change acts as a risk multiplier, but the specific link to exploitation is still under-researched, especially in the Caribbean. And so we know that in Antigua and Barbuda, over 60% of people live in coastal areas. The economy is heavily dependent on tourism, and climate shocks or disasters like hurricanes have major and long-term impacts. So what we wanted to really explore and understand was what happens to people after the disaster, what happens when livelihoods disappear, because that's when vulnerability deepens, and that's where exploitation risks begin to emerge. And as I mentioned, this is part of a wider project. We're also working in the Pacific, where there are similar contexts. There's small island developing states in the Pacific region as well. We're looking to produce a report on Fiji. So we're building a global picture, and we're looking to build the comparative evidence base around these issues.
Yes, and adding to what Sneh was saying, there is increasing recognition in the anti-trafficking sector that climate change is in fact one of the factors that is producing or exacerbating some of these vulnerabilities that make people more exposed to the risk of exploitation. But then when we look at the literature, we see that there is a clear gap. There are still a very limited number of studies that are going into the depth of exploring this intersection. And even more interestingly and relevantly for the work that CHRI and Free the Slaves have been doing, we see that the few studies that are out there are mostly focused on Southeast Asia or South Asia, while the Caribbean region and small island developing states more broadly have been quite overlooked. And this is one of the reasons why with this wider project and this report specifically, we wanted to put the focus on small island developing states that find themselves at the forefront of the climate crisis, and yet they have remained underrepresented in this emerging body of evidence.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Marta and Sneh, for that wonderful overview. I think you really touched on some of the key areas within the report, but also the larger project, telling us what prompted this and what you really were trying to find. But as always with research, and especially I know firsthand when doing research in the Caribbean, there's always the unexpected. So, was there anything that was unexpected that came up in the investigations to do this research, or even in the reporting process when you were writing up the report? Was there anything unexpected that happened?
I think more than unexpected, I would say that I was very pleasantly surprised and in a way also excited when we were doing the key informant interviews with government representatives, journalists, scholars, different people from the Antigua and Barbudan society, but also from the wider Caribbean region. I think I was very pleasantly surprised by the level of interest and engagement that there was on the topic. We didn't have to give a big overview into the project to explain to the people why we cared about it, because they cared as much as we do, even more, because they live those issues directly. And I think that made the process of collecting data, collecting information for this project extremely interesting to be part in, because of the passion that people that we worked with in the region from the very beginning, from the process of scheduling and doing the interviews up until the very final stage of disseminating the report. This kind of passion and enthusiasm that we found in the island state of Antigua and Barbuda and in the wider region was very encouraging for us.
I think maybe I can add is that, I think we find, as well as, not only in Antigua, but in Fiji, that the communities already understand the risks of climate impacts and climate-related disasters. And it's a real question about how policy needs to catch up with the lived reality, because people experience it. When you're talking about climate-related disasters, it's not just about hurricanes or rising sea levels. It's about livelihoods being disrupted, people having to move, migrate, forced migration, food and water security being affected, damage to homes and infrastructure, families under economic pressure, and people being pushed into risky or exploitative situations. So it's really not having to convince the communities of this, really, but it's really about how policies and programs need to catch up.
Yes, thank you for that. And I think it's so interesting, all of what you've mentioned, because being from the Caribbean myself, just this week I was looking at social media and I recognized that it's been 5 years since Super Hills volcano had an eruption, and the social media from my country, Barbados, was showing how covered the country was and how much something like that impacted the livelihoods of people on the ground there, because people couldn't travel, windows were blocked, it impacted health, schools were closed. There was all kinds of disruption because of a natural disaster, natural occurrence. And while that didn't directly extend into human exploitation, because it was just a recapture or vulnerabilities to human exploitation, because it was a recapture of that situation, it just came to mind as to how much of a lived experience this is for Caribbean people. And you mentioned government stakeholders, you mentioned communities. So my next question to you is, who really was the audience of the report? Who was it for? Who did you interact with? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, maybe I can start with who the report is aimed towards. Then Marta can talk about who did we interact with in the country. So this report is really aimed at a broad group. It includes government policymakers, climate and disaster response agencies, labor and social protection actors, but it's also meant for civil society organizations that work directly with communities and on policy. It's meant for regional bodies like CARICOM and the Five Cs, and also international partners, because there's a lot of sharing that can happen across borders, particularly with the Pacific, but in other areas as well that are facing climate disasters. Because it's aimed at a broad group of people, because this issue doesn't really fit comfortably in one sector. It cuts across all of them, and that's why in the report we emphasize the need for a coordinated response and instead of siloed approaches.
In terms of the interactions that we had while working on this research over the time span of 3 months, we devoted a lot of time to conducting interviews with people that have a well-documented knowledge and the expertise on the intersection between climate change and human exploitation, who had that kind of lived experience that Cherisse, you were referencing before, in Antigua and Barbuda, but not only, because the socioeconomic conditions of Antigua and Barbuda are not unique. They are quite observed in other Caribbean countries, so we also wanted to bring in our study some of that regional flavor and perspective. So we spoke with the government officials, as I said before, representatives of local NGOs, civil society organizations, academics, and also representatives of regional UN agencies and Caribbean regional organizations.
Thank you. So now that you've given us that baseline of who the audience was, or the intended audience, you were also invited to read the report and tell us what you think as you watch this video with us. But what do you think would be the key takeaways, or what do you hope would be the key takeaways and outcomes based on this report?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cherisse, and then one that goes to the heart of why we did the report and what we are hoping to change with these kind of findings and this conversation. So I think one of the main outcomes that we are hoping to achieve is to generate more of an understanding about the importance of going beyond the siloed approach that Sneh mentioned at the beginning of our conversation today, whereby you have the conversation on climate crisis, the conversation on human exploitation, and there isn't so much of intercommunication. So we are hoping with this kind of evidence, very context specific, grounded in the lived experience of people in Antigua and Barbuda, to help build a bridge, not only in terms of how we understand and how we looked at those issues with a more intersectional eyes, but also in terms of how does this evidence then translate into responses and programs, and we will have an opportunity to talk about it more in our talk today. But yeah, truly using these findings to inform ways in which things are done, inform responses, and make sure that the way in which we address human exploitation, the way in which we address climate crisis is more interconnected. And again, I think when engaging in Antigua and Barbuda together with Sneh and our partners locally, with the stakeholders in the country, it was great to see the level of interest that there is for this interconnected approach, which I think is something that we are very keen to take forward as we continue to work on these issues.
Yeah, and if I can add, when we launched the report in Antigua in early February, we really had a opportunity to talk about some of these issues with some of the people who are directly affected, but also some of the people who work with those that are directly affected. And I think the other main message, as well as what Marta was saying, is that climate action must be really people-centered. We want to see policies on climate change that actively reduces vulnerability and recognizes exploitation as a real risk for those people and communities that are impacted. Because if we design climate responses well, they can also be powerful tools for prevention. So this means more integrated policy responses. We should be linking climate adaptation with social protection, strengthening labor protections, particularly in high-risk sectors, which we'll discuss more when we review some of the findings of the report. And we should also invest in livelihoods and resilience and community-based solutions, because we really need to build on what exists, strengthen what already exists, and not start from scratch. And that means focusing on people.
Thank you. And I have had the pleasure of reading the report cover to cover. I strongly recommend that. But until everyone can get their hands on it and actually read the report online, give us a little bit of a teaser. What were the key findings that came out of this work?
Yeah, thank you so much, Cherisse, for these questions. There are a number of important and key findings, but I will touch on some of them, and then Sneh will help me to make the picture more complete and comprehensive. But what the report is really telling us, the story that the report brings to a surface, is that climate change in Antigua and Barbuda is generating multidimensional and interconnected vulnerabilities. We see specifically that for people working in climate-sensitive sectors like tourism, agriculture, fisheries, the climate crisis is having an impact on their livelihood, on their economic situation, is creating pathways to poverty. And this, in our research, emerged as the main pathway whereby then people that find themselves in economic vulnerability are at greater risk of ending up in situations of exploitation. We found, for instance, that women and girls that are employed in the tourist sector, when the climate crisis affects those economic opportunities, those employment opportunities, and find themselves suddenly unemployed without a stable and reliable source of income, may find themselves more exposed to ending up working in the informal sector, for instance, in a local bar, where the informal environment creates opportunities for exploitation, situations of sexual exploitation to emerge. And while this is the main pathway that we identify in our research, it is worth mentioning that it is not isolated. There are other vulnerabilities that come into play. For instance, displacement, as was observed in Barbuda back when there was Hurricane Irma in 2017. Lack of access to reliable healthcare, education, and they all play reinforcing one the other. And besides the vulnerability that women and girls are found to be exposed, we also found, and perhaps this Cherisse connects a bit with the unexpected findings that you were asking us about before. Boys are not unaffected by the climate crisis. We found that men and boys are also finding themselves very much affected. They also are affected through the pathway of loss of income and poverty. They may end up working in informal sectors, very labor intensive, where there isn't protection, where they are not working under regular contracts that give them safety, that give them a standard regular paycheck. So this creates a series of vulnerabilities. And finally, we also identified some instances in which boys may themselves be exposed to the risk of sexual exploitation. And this is very much underreported because of social stigma. This is very unspoken about. And this is something that we found in the report. But again, we couldn't go into the depths of these dynamics because of the social stigma that surrounds this reality.
Yeah, and maybe I can also add that, it's not, I mentioned this before, that when you have a climate-related disaster, whether it's hurricane or in droughts and flooding, etc., this climate-related disaster disrupts lives and services, and this creates conditions where exploitation can occur. And we did see this in our findings. We saw that when climate-related disasters happen, it's the loss of livelihood which is the central driver, and this is the strongest link in the report, particularly because Antigua relies heavily on the tourism sector, and also agricultural sectors are very affected. But because Antigua relies so heavily on tourism, that's a very climate-sensitive industry. And so this is why there's such a great impact, as well as, I suppose, the key findings that Marta mentioned. I mean, there's so many now, and I think one of the things that we found have documented in this report, that there are strong efforts on climate and on trafficking. There's strong efforts to resolve the issues and to address some of the issues, but they probably need a bit of connection. We need to connect the silos. We need to connect all the moving parts. We think that the climate policies sometimes need to be more focused on the risks of exploitation to the communities that have been displaced or negatively impacted, for example.
So thank you both for sharing that. And I think it's wonderful that we started mentioning some of the best practices or some of the good things already happening in Antigua and Barbuda, whether directly or indirectly, to help address this nexus. So we would have mentioned the existence of policy and legislation that's already happening. I think that that's a wonderful thing to pinpoint. We would have mentioned the fact that even at the report launch or when Marta was doing interviews, there was a willingness to share and a willingness to discuss and to explore. And there was already an awareness by stakeholders, whether governmental or non-governmental. And I think that you're both right. A little bit of what is missing or what we need now is this connection, hence the name Caribbean Connections, but this bringing together of actors and this ability to work together with what we have. I, for one, am so happy to see this report on the ground. I spend too much of my time talking about Caribbean history and culture and how that intersects with anti-trafficking and human exploitation. So this is a really, really wonderful give to the community from my perspective. But I wanted to ask, and this is my last question, I promise. I won't bombard you much longer. Is there a difference between the climate change and human exploitation or vulnerability to human exploitation nexus in the Caribbean and elsewhere that you've found, if you have the ability to speak to that, or just from your perspectives, what are some of the things that may be unique about the Caribbean experience, whether that's how it manifests, how it's responded to? Is there anything a little bit different about the Caribbean region?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Cherisse, because there are definitely shared global patterns. We see similar dynamics in the Pacific. When I was in Fiji doing the research for that report, it's very interesting how similar situations or similar contexts that the islands were facing, but there are some distinct differences as well. So there's similar dynamics in the Pacific, for example, with small island developing states, but the Caribbean has some very distinct features. First of all, I mean, a similar characteristic is that both regions have islands that have similar geographic exposure. These are small islands that have a high exposure to extreme weather. The interesting thing about Antigua is that there is a heavy economic independence on tourism. Which I've talked about already, which tourism accounts for about 80% of the GDP in Antigua and Barbuda, and this sector is very, very climate sensitive. So that it has a huge impact on livelihoods for people who are in the tourism sector when a climate-related disaster hits Antigua and Barbuda. We see some similarities around mobility and migration. Movement between islands increases risk to people that are being displaced and having to migrate. Smaller economies and institutions face constraints in their capacities to respond to these issues. So, there's very many similarities, but I think that the Caribbean is not I think the Caribbean is not unique in facing these risks, but the structural vulnerabilities intensifies them. So this is why we decided to focus on the Caribbean region separately. But I think that together, the evidence base around these issues will be useful to examine how the different governments have responded to these situations, how the communities have responded, how the communities are looking towards traditional methods to build up their resilience and capacity. We didn't have a chance to talk about that, but I don't know. But it's really interesting to see local communities reaching to their own traditions and histories to address some of these issues that they're facing. So I think the comparative work that we're doing, it matters. This comparative work does matter because the upcoming report on Fiji will highlight both similarities and differences, but we also hope that this work can bring people from across the two regions together, from the Caribbean, from the Pacific, to share and exchange the various challenges that they're facing, to share the innovative ideas that they are employing to address the common issues.
Thank you, Sneh. And I will add to that we did at Cherisse some previous research on the same topic, and we focused on the as a case study for that other project. And something that I found interesting in the Philippines that didn't emerge in the Caribbean, and that is probably an interesting difference on which to reflect, is that in the Philippines, in communities that we visited that were affected by climate change, a pattern that we observed is that human traffickers specifically target those communities because they are aware of the vulnerabilities that they would be experiencing, individuals and families, after a typhoon, for example, hit a certain village. So they would specifically target that village with fake job offers. They would facilitate the movement of those people, especially young women, to either a bigger city in the Philippines or even abroad in the Gulf countries. And that would set up a situation of human trafficking and exploitation. While in the Caribbean, we didn't see that dynamic at play. We saw that people driven by desperation, driven by loss of livelihood, the fear of poverty, end up working in sectors that are not sufficiently well regulated, where there are informal arrangements at play that make them vulnerable to situations of exploitation. But we didn't find that targeted dynamic whereby human traffickers would go and then facilitate a situation of movement and exploitation. And I think that's an interesting difference that can tell us a lot about what is the human trafficking situation in the Caribbean.
Thank you both so much for sharing that. I mean, for me, growing up in the Caribbean until I was an adult, this has been a really, really wonderful conversation to have. Even though I am in the anti-trafficking sector, I've never thought about the things that when I was growing up in the Caribbean. So Sneh mentioned our traditional ways of responding to climate change. So thinking about things like chattel houses, which is in the report, everybody go read about that connection. I didn't think about that as special or as climate resilient. I thought about it as this is what we have because this is what our culture is. I thought about chattel houses as this is my grandmother's house. This is what I knew growing up. So that was just it. It was a part of my reality. I don't know what you think, Adrian, but it's been really a pleasure to see that brought into the academic space, the charity sector, the third sector, and governmental conversations to pinpoint that, yes, Caribbean people, we've always been responsive to our conditions. We are resilient. We are doing things to ensure that our livelihoods, our legacies can survive and will survive. And because of that, I do have one final question for you both. You went to Antigua and Barbuda for the launch of the report. We didn't talk a lot about the launch specifically, but I want to ask you, while you were there, what was your favorite thing about Antigua and Barbuda? And that can be anything. Doesn't have to be related to the report, but what was your favorite thing?
Go ahead, Marta.
Okay. I think besides the beaches, that I guess is everyone's favorite thing, but the thing that I love the most was the colorful houses. I'd never been to a place with so much color in it, and I was like, everywhere I was turning my head, there was some beautiful, small, colorful house that was just like, I just wanted to take a picture of. So like now I have my phone filled with the pictures of someone's house in Antigua. And it's just so beautiful, and the contrast with the nature around, so lush and so green, is just something special that it really stuck with me as I came back home.
Sneh, what about you?
Oh, there's so many things. I don't know where to start. But I have to say that I did a little trip between English Harbor and St. John's, and on the way we stopped off at this roadside stall where this wonderful older woman, this mama, unfortunately I cannot remember her name, but she was cooking up fried fish at the roadside, and there was a queue. And there's so many people eating this wonderful fish, and so I took some of this home, and it was just, or to the hotel, and it was just this lovely fresh fish from the waters of the Caribbean, and it was just beautiful because this woman, it's just being in the queue, talking to people. I just remember the warmth and the hospitality and friendliness and openness of the Antigua and Barbuda people. And not only on the street, but also when we were launching the report in Antigua, the people that we worked with, from senators to people in the ministries that came to the launch, that heard what we had to say, that debated the issues with us. and as well as civil society organizations, but just people that you meet on the street or in the shops, and it was just really wonderful. So I am looking forward to be going back to Antigua at some point.
I'm sure the Caribbean will be looking and lucky to have you. For anyone who's from Antigua and is watching this episode of Caribbean Connections, if you can tell us the name of Sneh's food stall, fish stall, that would be wonderful. For anybody visiting Antigua, if you want to take a road trip and see if you can find Sneh's food delicacy location, we would be glad for you to tell us what the name and where that is and your experience. That is it from me. All I left to say is to say thank you to you both for chatting with me. This has been absolutely a pleasure. I love talking about the Caribbean. I will hand back over to my co-host, Adrian, who's been very quiet in the background for this episode. And I'll leave it to you, Adrian.
Thanks so much, Cherisse, and great job. I just want to ask, where can people access the report?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. So we have the report uploaded on the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative website. It's www.humanrightsinitiative.org. And the name of the report is, it's a long one, From Climate Crisis to Human Exploitation, a focus on Antigua and Barbuda. And it's looking at the multidimensional vulnerability in small island developing states. It's also available on the Free the Slaves website as well. But please do take a look at it. It's downloadable. We appreciate comments on the report as well. And you'll find that the report on Fiji will be uploaded on our website as well next month. It's due to be released next month.
Okay, in the month of May. Excellent. And I know that Antigua and Barbuda is the venue for the upcoming Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting later on this year. Can we expect some of these discussions coming out of the report, not only in Antigua and Barbuda, but also Fiji, will feature as part of maybe a side event or some other discussion at CHOGM?
Yes, so you're right, Adrian, and thanks for bringing it up. At the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that is happens every 2 years, the next meeting will be happening at the beginning of November in Antigua. And we will be discussing things like climate change impacts, not only at the Commonwealth Heads meeting, the main meeting, but also at the various forums that are running parallel to the Commonwealth Heads meeting. So, for example, the People's Forum, which brings together civil society to talk about climate-related impacts to civil society organizations and communities. There's a specific session on climate change. There's going to be a women's forum as well, where the impact of climate change disasters we're looking at how these impact women and girls specifically. There's also 2 other forums, Business Forum and the Youth Forum, where I'm sure that climate change is going to be a hot topic. And so we'll be trying to advocate for these issues to be discussed, debated, but also to push for change in policy and programs.
And I'm thinking that that's a great opportunity for people from the Pacific and from the Caribbean to meet in person and to network and to share those experiences that you were telling us about earlier. So I'm looking forward to perhaps one or both of you returning to the Caribbean for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting so that we can see that advance. I remember you mentioned in terms of your prospective audience, the 5 Cs, and some of these are CARICOM institutions which really have a responsibility to do that type of research on climate change and its impacts in our region. So I'm trusting that a copy of the report could be sent to them for their consideration and open up some channels for further discussion. I would love to see maybe a comparison between what happened in Antigua and Barbuda and its response to Hurricane Irma and what's happened in Dominica and its response to Hurricane Maria. And they both took place in the same year, 2017. So from my perspective, I'm seeing and I'm hearing that there has been a lot done by the respective governments. There have been policy changes as a result of these major Category 5 hurricanes in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as Cherisse mentioned earlier, the volcanic eruption of La Soufrière and how it impacted not only the citizens of that country, but carried ash over to Barbados, shut down the airport, and so many other impacts. So it's not just one country being impacted when an event takes place. These are climate hazards. We know for the most part that there's a season during which they will occur. For the earthquakes, for the volcanic eruptions, there's seldom that length of warning. But there's constant preparation. There's constant preparation. So I would love to see this discussion continue and really ramp it up for CHOGM and see how having so many policymakers in one space at CHOGM, you can see how the recommendations coming out of the report can impact multiple Caribbean, Pacific, and other Commonwealth member states. So kudos to both of you, to your respective organizations for delving into this aspect of work that will benefit small island developing states. Yeah. So thank you again to my wonderful co-host, Cherisse. As she said, she knows both of you very well, and her ability to articulate the issues and to really probe a little deeper. Always a blessing to have you join us, Cherisse. Any final words, Sneh, Marta?
Yeah, no, I want to thank you again, Adrian and Cherisse. This has really been an important conversation. And I agree with you that this report hopefully will be, I know that things are happening in the region already. We're wanting to support all of that is existing. We hope that this report can add to those conversations and enhance those conversations, strengthen the conversations. We hope that the reports and the research we're doing in other regions can also contribute to looking at some of the innovative and different ways that people have addressed and resolved some of these issues as well. So yeah, I hope that this is just the start of a good cooperation. I want to just say also that, we really, climate change is already reshaping people's lives in very real ways. And unless we really address the human dimension of that, looking specifically at livelihoods, protection systems, and social safety nets, we risk allowing these climate-related disasters to become a pathway, as Marta was saying, a pathway into exploitation. But, the thing is that this report revealed that we already know many of the solutions. And if we act together and if we act early on, we can reduce vulnerability, we can strengthen resilience, and we can protect the rights of people and communities.
Yes, and thank you so much, Adrian and Cherisse, again for offering us a platform where to have this very important conversation. And we are very much looking forward to being a guest here again in your wonderful podcast series and engaging with the people in the region.
Thank you. And Cherisse, any final words from you?
Just to say thank you to you, Adrian, for always keeping us going and keeping Caribbean connections running. And that's another episode for us.
Thank you so much, everyone. If you're viewing this, please ensure that you access the report. It's on two websites, freetheslaves.net and humanrightsinitiative.org. Got that correct? Excellent. And if you have any further questions, please just send us an email, secretariat@ccatip.org, and we'll be able to put you in touch with Marta Furlan, Sneh Aurora, and the work that they do. So that's all from us. Have a great day. Bye-bye.